Hello everyone. I thought I'm dressed for it, so why not do it right away? So this is going to be a slightly different book experience. I will be talking about one of my favorite genres, and I'll try to elaborate why is it my favorite genre, and then I'll talk you through the different authors that I've read right from my childhood, early youth, and now. And so I'll mention a lot of authors and a few books here and there. um, okay, so I'll get started. So why is horror my favorite genre? So I think in any good horror movie would have a sad story at the heart, right? It either starts with a sad story or there is a sad story leading up to it, right? So there's a lot of pathos which is at the heart of any good horror story or novel. And I think for an author to be writing a really good horror novel, they have to have lived through that experience. They need not necessarily have lived that exact experience, but psychologically they have been in that place in order to be able to articulate it. Right. So I think, and I feel it's very difficult to do as opposed to writing maybe a romantic novel or something which is more research backed, like a historical novel. Think a horror novel would require you to be in a certain place in your mind, and I really, that's something I really respect. The other reason is the nature of horror is immediate. By that I mean to say, if you might have like five different types of possible horrors playing out in your mind, right? I mean, I can really relate to it because I'm a very anxious individual. I have a clinical diagnosis for anxiety. So I at any point in time I could be worrying about three or four different things, but whatever is immediate takes up the mind space, right? So by that I mean to say, if let's say, I'm afraid that I might be coming down with something, or I might be missing my bus, right? So whatever is nearest in terms of chronology will affect me most. So the nature of fear is such. And so when you are reading a good horror novel, right, or a good ghost story, for example, it will take you out of your reality in a way that no other kind of genre can, right? It a really good movie, a really good horror story can do that for you, right? So many a times when I see people say they're depressed or they're in some less than optimal state of mind, I would often tell them, go read a good horror novel, or go read a good detective novel. These novels are also many a times fairly dark. So there are certain books which I love, but I will not read when I'm in a certain state of mind, but I'll talk through that. So I've read a fair bit of horror stories, horror novels, etc. In childhood, it started off with Bram Stoker and Dracula. I think it's a classic, although it's more adventure than horror, I think. But certainly, it was my possible, my um, introduction to horror in a way. Then I had this fat book called Horror Story Anthology, and that had a lot of different authors whom I later looked up and read a lot of their work as well. So Henry James, Ambrose Bierce, Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu. He was an Irish author, and he actually has been attributed the first vampire novel. It was called Carmilla. You may want to look it up. It's old English. It's slightly difficult reading, but it's a short novel, more like a novella, but it's fairly good. And Arthur Conan Doyle. I'm not sure. I mean, he is a creator of Sherlock Holmes, but he wrote some fairly good horror stories. And I have an anthology of his horror stories, which is called Tales of Unease, and I tend to carry it on my flights because it takes my mind off my immediate fear, which is a plane crashing. So that was more of my childhood. During my early youth, I mean, when I say early youth, not exactly early youth, it was about my 25-30 range. I read The Exorcist, right? So William Peter Blatty, I consider that one of the best books that I've ever read. I mean, if I want to count my top 10, Exorcist will feature there. It's such a good book, way more scary than the movie. And it's scary in a way that fear will penetrate in your psyche, right? You start questioning yourself, you start questioning your reality. That's the kind of novel it is. Very depressing, very dark. I do not read that when I'm not in the right frame of mind. I read a lot of Stephen King, and while I read a lot of his work, two works which stand out are The Shining. Again, a story which is way more horrifying than the movie, and Pet Cemetery. Very full of pathos and deeply disturbing novel. I also did a lot of Ira Levin. Name sounds like a woman, but it's a he actually. And Stepford Wives and Rosemary's Baby. Rosemary's Baby again I consider to be one of the very good horror literature that has been ever written. And recently, I also read a book by Riley Sager. I don't know how it's pronounced. It's called Lock Every Door. Right. That's sort of starts off where Rosemary's Baby stops. Quite a good read. Kind of a pot boiler, but it was good. And what have I read of late? Right. So last 2 years during the pandemic time, I actually found authoresses, right? I found some new authoresses and I refound some of my favorites who I did not know that they wrote horror literature, right? So Susan Hill, she is the one who wrote The Woman in Black. I think possibly one of the scariest ghost stories ever. So I've read a lot of Susan Hill. I've read Mist in the Mirror, not so good. Then I've read Dolly, not so good. But The Woman in Black was really something. So I've read Susan Hill quite a bit. I read Shirley Jackson. So Shirley Jackson is she wrote The Haunting of Hill House, right? The story is rather different from how it has been picturized in the Netflix series, but this one was a really good book. I've read The Lottery. This is a short story by Shirley Jackson, very scary, and it was banned at its time. It was so scary. It's a short story, very good. I've read the collection of Shirley Jackson because I was quite impressed with her writing. Edith Nesbit, who wrote The Railway Children, she was primarily a children's author. She has written a set of ghost stories. I'd say they're subpar, kind of crude, not very scary. But then I was surprised by Edith Wharton. She is the lady. She won the Pulitzer for her The Age of Innocence. She used to write drama, but she's a fantastic horror writer. There is a collection of her supernatural stories, and you can buy it. I think it's a Kindle only as of now, and you can look that up in Amazon. Fantastic set of collection. That's by Edith Wharton. That's what I've been reading, and I already did the book experience on The Omen. So you already know I'm reading that, David Seltzer. And then I possibly might start on House of Leaves. I'm saving that for a time when I'm feeling really down. That was my horror story, right? And hopefully that will give you some authors, some ideas, some book names if you would want to explore this genre or else try out a few authors. Please do so, and do leave your comment on this book experience, since this was slightly different from the ones that I usually do. Thank you.